They laughed when he walked in. Laughed like he was the punchline to a joke only they could tell. Too dark, too confident, too out of place. He didn't say a word, didn't flinch, didn't fold. But from the moment his foot touched that aisle, the verdict was handed down. He was a threat in a tailored suit, a disruption wrapped in polished shoes, and they were ready to make sure he knew it. The woman in row 1 clutched her bag tighter. The man in 3 smirked like he'd just spotted a stray in a 5-star lounge. And the crew? They moved around him like he was luggage that didn't belong. They didn't need a reason. His skin was enough. They stripped him of service, of dignity, of silence, and still thought they'd won. But what none of them knew was that buried under the weight of their judgment was a truth big enough to bring down everything they thought they owned. What if the man they tried to erase was the one holding the pen? This isn't just a story. This is a reckoning at 35,000 feet. If you're not afraid of uncomfortable truths and sharp reversals, hit subscribe now. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And which moment in this story would have made you stand up? We're listening. The moment Maurik Dane stepped into the first-class cabin, the temperature in the air changed. It wasn't the climate control, it was the stares. Subtle, sharp, scanning. Not the curious kind, but the kind that judged before understanding. He carried himself with the composed ease of someone who had earned his presence there, dressed in a navy wool overcoat, slacks tailored to quiet perfection, and leather shoes that bore the dust of boardrooms, not sidewalks. His skin, rich and deep in tone, seemed to be the first thing the passengers noticed. And for many of them, it was enough. He didn't hesitate. His stride was smooth, his posture upright as he navigated the tight corridor, one hand resting casually on his duffel slung across his shoulder. But 2 rows into the cabin, a woman sitting in seat 2, shifted in her seat. Platinum blonde hair swept into a high chignon, pearl earrings that caught the cabin lights, and a scarf wrapped so precisely around her neck it could have been pinned by a stylist. She looked up, took one glance at Maurik as he passed her row, and slowly reached into her designer tote. From it, she retrieved a travel-sized packet of disinfectant wipes. Without a word or a glance back, she leaned toward the armrest he had brushed walking past and began wiping it down with steady, deliberate motions. Her lips barely moved, but the message screamed louder than any announcement from the flight deck. Maurik saw it all without turning. He had learned long ago how to sense the aggression in quiet gestures, the violence of cleanliness, the threat wrapped in politeness. He reached his seat, 1C, and slid his bag into the overhead bin. That was when the second message came. As he turned to step into his row, a man in his mid-50s stood frozen in place. The man's shoulders were broad, his frame thick under a pressed beige trench coat, but he made no move. He stared directly ahead, eyes glazed with faux distraction, pretending not to notice that he was blocking the aisle. Maurik stopped in front of him and gave a quiet nod, a silent request. The man remained motionless, his hand resting lazily on the headrest of seat 1B, his body angled just enough to make it awkward for Maurik to pass. A second ticked by. Then another. Still no movement. Only when a flight attendant called politely from behind, "Sir, please," did the man shuffle 2 reluctant steps to the side. But even then, he managed to meet Maurik's eyes with a glance soaked in disdain. Not anger, not annoyance, just that peculiar mix of smugness and superiority that never needed words. Maurik slid into his seat and fastened the belt with smooth fingers, his expression unreadable. He didn't look around, didn't react, but inside a familiar burn began to rise, controlled, measured, banked behind years of practiced composure. He took a slow breath and turned his gaze out the window, watching the last of the boarding crew make their way across the tarmac. Behind him, a pair of voices whispered, too casually, just loud enough. One mentioned surprise at how crowded first class was today. The other agreed, adding that it must be loyalty perks letting just anyone in now. The attendants moved through the aisle, offering champagne and warm towels. The blonde woman beside him took hers with a pristine smile. The man who had blocked the aisle raised his flute toward a fellow passenger in a mock toast. And yet, when the tray reached Maurik, the attendant passed him with barely a glance. continuing down the aisle as if he didn't exist. He waited a beat, two. Then, still calm, he reached for the in-flight magazine and opened it to a random page. His eyes scanned it, but his mind wasn't reading. Not really. This was ritual. The same old dance. The smile that never came. The space that was never truly his, no matter how much he paid. It wasn't new, and that was what made it exhausting. Across from him, the woman with the disinfectant glanced over once more. Her gaze wasn't curious now, it was triumphant. 2 rows behind him, nestled in the aisle seat of 3D, a woman with lacquered fingernails and tight curls leaned toward her neighbor, barely containing a smirk. Her voice, carefully pitched above the idle cabin murmur, carried just enough to reach the surrounding passengers, including Maverick. You see that nose? Looks like he's been digging tunnels, not closing deals. The man beside her chuckled, coughed to cover it, and adjusted his cufflinks. Underground hustle, huh? He murmured, and they both laughed. The chuckle wasn't loud, but it was sharp. Sharp enough to slice through the air and settle in Maverick's spine. He didn't move, didn't flinch. He kept his eyes on the seatback screen ahead of him, pretending to browse the map, fingers idle over the control. But his mind cataloged the insult, folded it with the rest, another splinter wedged into years of silent resilience. A few moments later, as the aircraft doors sealed and the final instructions droned through the cabin speakers, Maverick unbuttoned his coat and slipped it off slowly, smoothing the fabric with careful hands before folding it over his lap. That's when another voice, 1 row across, snorted loud enough for several passengers to hear. Now that's a look, the man muttered. You ever see a truck stop manager try Wall Street cosplay? The words were aimed at his companion, but his eyes locked momentarily on Maverick. The man wore a bright blue blazer that screamed Weekend Yacht Club, his loafers spotless, his grin confident and self-satisfied. Maverick breathed through his nose. The instinct to react was there, just beneath the surface. But he'd been raised in the company of silence and taught the price of anger, how easily it could be used against him. He looked down at his coat, at the subtle weave and expert stitching, a gift from his mentor after landing their first $1 million contract. He had worn this same coat when he rang the bell at the stock exchange. And yet here, in a space that marketed dignity, he was dressed like a fraud to the eyes that refused to see beyond skin. The flight attendants returned with pre-departure drinks. The one assigned to his side of the cabin hesitated when she reached him, glass tray in hand. Her hesitation was brief, but visible. Instead of asking his preference like she had for the previous passengers, she offered a half smile and said, "Water's probably best, right?" He nodded slowly, not because she was right, but because he knew how these games were played. Behind him, the woman from 3D let out a faint giggle, the tail end of an inside joke Maverick wasn't supposed to understand, but was always expected to absorb. The plane lifted off, and with it came the shift in cabin rhythm. Blankets were distributed, screens flicked to life, and the false intimacy of first class settled in. Champagne glasses clinked again. Conversation resumed. Maverick kept to himself, opening a folder from his briefcase and reviewing quarterly forecasts he could recite in his sleep. Numbers, strategy, precision, the things that never judged him back. But even then, his mind couldn't completely detach from the voices still humming around him like static behind a thin wall. Across the aisle, a younger man whispered too loudly, gesturing with his thumb toward Maverick while laughing under his breath. No way that guy's not someone's assistant who faked his way into this seat. You think he even knows what a merger is? Another replied, bet he still uses prepaid cards. The jokes escalated, like children testing the limits of a substitute teacher. Every punchline designed to hit, to confirm some unspoken hierarchy no one ever had to explain. Maverick heard each word, felt them nestle between the folds of the cabin's luxury. He shifted slightly in his seat, crossing one leg over the other, and let his hand rest on the leather briefcase beneath the seat in front of him. Not for reassurance, for reminder. The initials stamped on its surface were his. The contents inside, proprietary data from a company he built. Every deal sealed with his signature. Every dollar earned, not inherited. But to the cabin, he was still an intruder in a suit, a shape they couldn't place, a narrative they didn't want to rewrite. An attendant passed by again, this time offering snacks. She lingered by the woman in 2A, complimented her choice of jewelry, asked about her last trip to Florence, the small talk of status. Then, she reached Malric and said nothing, just placed a foil-wrapped package on his tray and moved on. He stared at the snack, untouched. The foil reflected the overhead light, a distorted mirror that warped his reflection. He glanced toward the window. Night had fallen, but the runway lights still blinked below in quiet rows, distant and indifferent. The cabin had turned to more genteel pursuits, whispered business calls, murmured exchanges over real estate deals, and the soft hum of personal screens playing financial documentaries or coastal property showcases. First class was behaving exactly as it was expected to, except in one detail. The detail no one else seemed to notice or pretended not to. Malric's glass remained empty. The attendants had passed 3 times now with beverages, sparkling wine, orange juice, still or sparkling water. Each time, they poured for the adjacent rows, smiled as they topped off crystal flutes, and breezed by his seat without even pausing. The first time, he had assumed it was a mistake. The second time, he had raised a hand, a small, quiet gesture not meant to draw attention, only to ask. The attendant's eyes met his, paused briefly, then moved on. Her tray balanced neatly as she leaned into a conversation with the woman across the aisle. The third time, he didn't bother. He let the gesture die before it reached the air. He watched the bubbles swirl in another man's glass and thought how strange it was that luxury could be so exact in what it included and what it withheld. 20 minutes into the flight, the hot towels arrived. Rolled in neat bundles, they were handed out with silver tongs, lightly scented, steaming just enough to feel indulgent. The ritual passed row by row. The man who had mocked Malric's coat earlier took 2. The couple behind him unrolled theirs with casual delight. But when the attendant reached Malric's row, she paused, glanced down, and continued walking. The tongs never dipped. The cart never stopped. The warmth passed him without a flicker. That was when he knew it wasn't an oversight. It was orchestration. He waited through the next service, through the clink of forks against porcelain and the rustle of meal menus being tucked away. His tray remained closed. He waited until the bustle of attendants thinned and the lighting dimmed to that curated, soft glow meant to ease passengers into artificial calm. Then he stood, slow and purposeful, adjusted the collar of his shirt, and stepped into the aisle. He didn't march. He moved with the quiet weight of someone who had walked into boardrooms where every face doubted him and walked out with contracts signed. He moved past seats where heads turned just slightly, just enough to notice, not enough to acknowledge. He reached the galley, where the head flight attendant stood adjusting a drawer of flatware, her back turned, posture too perfect to be natural. "Excuse me," he said, voice firm but calm. She turned, her expression composed but already annoyed by the interruption. "I believe I've been missed several times during service," he said evenly. "No drink, no towel, no meal." She blinked, her smile forming but not fully blooming. "Sir, we're very busy tonight," she replied. "Perhaps you missed our offer earlier." Malric stared. "I assure you I did not." She glanced at a nearby attendant, who suddenly busied herself with inventory. "Well, we can get you something now," the woman offered, but her tone made it clear it was charity, not service. Malric's tone didn't waver. "No. What I'd like is for you to acknowledge the discrepancy and explain it." Her face shifted. Not shock, not concern, but irritation. "Sir," she said quietly, "this is a luxury cabin. We try to maintain a certain standard of experience for everyone. I would advise you to be mindful of the environment." The words hit with the force of something far older than the moment. Not just a warning, a coded message. Stay in your place. Don't raise your voice. Don't disrupt the harmony that was never meant to include you. "I'm speaking calmly," Malric said. "I've made no scene. I'm asking for the same courtesy extended to every other passenger here." Her smile hardened. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable letting us handle your needs when we can." Press your call button next time." Then she turned, signaling the conversation was over. Not resolved, just dismissed. Malric didn't speak again. He turned, stepped back into the aisle, and walked slowly to his seat. The woman in 2A watched him pass with the same guarded disgust she had shown earlier. The man across the aisle smirked faintly, his hand resting on a half-finished glass of wine. Back in seat 1C, Malric sat down and stared straight ahead. His tray remained closed. His hands rested calmly on the armrests. But inside, something new had begun to stir. Not anger, he was long past that. What settled in his chest now was certainty. This wasn't going to stop. They didn't know who he was. Not yet. They didn't care to know. Not yet. But the moment was coming. And when it did, there would be no mistaking it. But even in the hush, the undercurrent had changed. He could feel it. The air had shifted, thicker now, not just with exclusion, but with escalation. It began with the woman in 1A. Her posture had been stiff since takeoff, but now it sharpened, as though bracing for performance. She twisted in her seat, turning slightly toward Malric. Her eyes, pale and alert, scanned his face as if looking for something wrong, something dangerous. He felt the stare, but did not return it. His stillness seemed to disturb her more than any reaction would have. She leaned toward the aisle, pressing her call button with unnecessary force. The nearest attendant responded with practiced grace, bending slightly to listen. "There's something wrong," the woman whispered, but her voice was not soft enough to conceal intent. "That man beside me, he keeps staring at me." She didn't lower her voice out of fear. She wanted it to be heard. "I don't feel safe." Malric, hearing every word, remained frozen. No glance. No protest. He had learned long ago that truth rarely mattered once fear was claimed. The attendant nodded quickly, her smile faltering. "Sir," she said, now addressing Malric, "may I see your boarding pass again?" Her tone was polite, but the edge beneath it cut clean. Malric reached calmly into his coat pocket and handed over the ticket without a word. The woman in 1A leaned back, triumphant in her silence, watching the exchange unfold as if her performance had confirmed some unspoken suspicion. The attendant studied the pass longer than necessary. "Thank you," she said eventually. "We're just double-checking the manifest. For everyone's comfort." The word "everyone" hung in the air like a blade. Malric nodded once and took the ticket back. He knew this tactic. Manufactured discomfort was more effective than overt aggression. Fear, even fake, had power when weaponized in polite society. But the moment didn't end there. Barely 10 minutes later, as beverage service resumed, a woman from the second row stood to retrieve something from the overhead bin. Her designer handbag, a heavy leather piece with brass trim, slipped from her shoulder as she turned, dropping straight down and striking Malric's knee. The thud was solid. Pain radiated up his leg as he instinctively drew back, hands gripping the armrest. "Oh," the woman gasped, but not at what she'd done. Her tone was scolding, not apologetic. "You're sitting too far into the aisle." I barely had space to move. She didn't check on his knee. She didn't ask if he was all right. She crouched just enough to retrieve her bag and cast a glance of exaggerated frustration. "Honestly, these seats are narrow enough," she muttered to the attendant now standing nearby. "Some people just don't know how to sit properly." The implication wasn't subtle. Malric closed his eyes briefly. His pulse thudded in his jaw, not from the pain, but from the restraint it took to remain composed. The attendant who had witnessed the entire incident offered a vague nod. No warning was issued. No concern was shown. The bag could have broken skin, could have fractured bone, and still, Malric was the problem. The woman returned to her seat with the air of someone wronged. He shifted slightly, wincing, then straightened. No words. No complaint. The bruising sensation in his leg echoed, the bruising done to his dignity. The world around him functioned as if nothing had happened. The conversations resumed. The lights dimmed once more, but the shift had crystallized. He was no longer simply being excluded. Now he was being contained, quietly, subtly, but deliberately. The next wave came when the head flight attendant returned with a supervisor. Malric looked up, already knowing what was coming. "Mr. Dane," the supervisor began, her tone rehearsed, "we've received some concerns from passengers regarding your presence." She paused, as if waiting for him to protest, to lash out, to give them justification. But he didn't. He simply stared. So she continued, "For the safety and comfort of everyone, we're just verifying that all seats are properly assigned and that no disruptions continue." "There have been no disruptions," Malric replied, voice even. "Only discomfort caused by perception." The supervisor hesitated. Her eyes narrowed slightly, perhaps surprised by the clarity in his tone, perhaps by his choice of words. "Nonetheless," she continued, "we'd appreciate your cooperation. We need to maintain a calm cabin environment." The irony of that statement struck like lightning. Accusation masked as neutrality. Malric gave a small nod. "You have my full cooperation. But you may want to consider who's truly disturbing your calm." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't break composure. But in that sentence, he shifted the balance, if only by a degree. The supervisor offered a tense smile, then stepped away. As she disappeared behind the curtain, Malric turned his head slightly and caught the gaze of the woman in 1A. She looked away quickly, but not before he saw it. The flicker of unease. Not guilt, not apology, just discomfort in the face of someone who refused to react as expected. Malric sat motionless in seat 1C, the sting in his knee throbbing beneath the slacks, the echo of manufactured suspicion still hanging in the stale, climate-controlled air. Around him, first class had returned to its usual hush, the kind of hush that covered complicity like a blanket. But this time, it wasn't just silence, it was anticipation. The kind that signaled something bigger, something orchestrated. The stares were no longer curious or amused. They were hungry. Watching him now wasn't about disbelief. It was about hoping for collapse. He was no longer merely being judged. He was being pushed to react. The curtain at the front of the cabin stirred. From behind it emerged two figures in Navy uniforms, not attendants, but security personnel assigned to the airline. Officers meant to be invisible unless summoned. They walked with the ease of men used to taking command, their eyes scanning each row until they found him. The lead officer, a heavy-set man with graying hair and a jaw locked in perpetual irritation, leaned down slightly, his voice low but unflinching. "Sir, we've been asked to have a word with you. Please stand and step into the galley." Malric didn't move immediately. He looked up, his expression still calm, still unreadable. "Is there an issue with my ticket?" he asked, his voice level. The officer's eyes narrowed. "There have been multiple complaints," he said flatly. "Passengers feel uncomfortable. There have been reports of disruptive behavior." The lie wasn't even clever. It didn't have to be. In a world like this, perception had more weight than truth. Malric's eyes didn't blink. "I've done nothing disruptive," he said quietly. The officer straightened, lips pressed into a thin line. "We need your cooperation," he repeated, tone harder now, "or we will be forced to remove you from the aircraft." The entire first-class cabin had gone still. A few passengers leaned in, pretending not to eavesdrop. A woman in 2D picked up her phone and held it just low enough to pretend she wasn't filming. Another man folded his arms across his chest and muttered under his breath, loud enough for effect. "Told you. Doesn't take long before trouble starts." Malric stood slowly, every movement deliberate. The pain in his knee bit deeper, but he ignored it. He looked directly at the officer. "I'll step into the galley," he said, "but I expect to know who lodged these complaints." The officer didn't answer. He simply gestured toward the curtain, motioning for Malric to walk ahead. As he passed through the narrow aisle, whispers trailed him like smoke. One voice, clear, male, dismissive, broke the tension with a theatrical clap. The sound rang out once, then again, slow and sarcastic. Then others joined. Not a standing ovation, a mockery. The applause of people who believed they had won something, who believed they had watched someone be put back in his place. Finally, one woman muttered, "Some people just don't get it." "He should have taken the hint hours ago," another said. "This isn't his world." Malric didn't look back. He didn't speak. He walked through the curtain and into the tight galley, where the flight supervisor now stood flanked by both officers. The lead attendant stood nearby, arms folded across her chest, her posture the portrait of corporate smugness. "Mr. Dane," the supervisor began, "this flight has become tense, and it's our responsibility to ensure everyone feels secure." "Given the complaints we've received," Malrick interrupted, his voice sharp but still controlled. "You've received no legitimate complaints. You've allowed assumptions and prejudice to shape policy in real time." The supervisor hesitated, as if suddenly realizing she wasn't speaking to someone easily bullied. "Be that as it may," she said carefully, "we have the right to refuse service to any passenger at our discretion." Malrick exhaled, low and steady. "You're threatening to remove me for sitting in a seat I paid for not reacting while being insulted, ignored, and physically struck?" He took the step closer. "If that's your definition of protocol, then say it plainly. You're uncomfortable with who I am, not what I've done." The officer beside the supervisor shifted slightly, less certain now. But the supervisor doubled down. "We need a decision, sir. Comply now or face removal." For a moment, Malrick said nothing. He looked past them through the narrow crack of the curtain where he could see the backs of the first-class heads still turned, still watching. He saw them waiting for him to break, to be escorted down the aisle in shame, to confirm the roles they had written for him. Instead, he said, "I'm not leaving. I've done nothing to justify being removed. If you insist, you'll need to physically escort me in front of every passenger on this plane, and I advise you to check again who you're about to embarrass." The plane cruised steadily above the clouds, but inside the cabin, the atmosphere had grown heavier, more suffocating. Malrick sat still in seat 1C, the air around him colder than before, not from the ventilation, but from the collective withdrawal of those near him. No one made eye contact anymore. No one leaned in with curiosity or disdain. Instead, they leaned away, subtle shifts of posture that widened space around him like a force field of judgment. They didn't need to speak. Their silence did the work. After his refusal to leave the aircraft in the previous confrontation, the attendants had retreated behind a wall of strained professionalism. There were no apologies, no further threats, just the cold mechanics of service stripped of hospitality. The supervisor hadn't returned. The security officers had taken their seats in the crew jump seat, eyes still occasionally drifting in Malrick's direction, not out of concern, but surveillance. The woman in 1A, who had earlier feigned fear, now clutched her scarf tighter and subtly shifted her body to face the window. She had not spoken another word, but her performance had already achieved its purpose. Her false fear had planted a seed. The man across the aisle no longer sneered. He simply refused to acknowledge Malrick's existence at all. Even the attendants delivering meals did so with clipped, mechanical movements, setting down trays and moving away without a glance. Then came the knock at the invisible wall. A quiet conversation among crew members in the galley became a bit too loud. Malrick heard his name, not clearly, but enough to know it was his name, enough to feel the focus sharpen. The whispers had shifted tones. They were no longer simply annoyed. They were cautious, alert. Something had changed. A few minutes later, a new face approached. She wore a darker uniform, an administrative agent, not flight crew. Her badge was visible, but her presence wasn't announced. She stopped at Malrick's row, crouched slightly beside him, and spoke in a voice low and controlled. "Mr. Dane, we received an internal alert. Someone on board has filed a report identifying you as a potential risk." The words landed like ice on steel. Malrick didn't move. "A risk," he repeated slowly. "Based on what?" The woman avoided direct eye contact. "It's anonymous," she said. "There was concern about your behavior. We're required to flag it and note it in the flight system." She didn't say it outright, but the implication was immediate. He was now on a list, monitored, marked, a name in a database shared across systems designed to quietly blacklist without ever issuing formal accusations. Malrick exhaled through his nose. The irony was sharp. He had spoken no threats, made no aggressive movements. All he had done was exist, quietly, with dignity, in a space that had decided long before boarding that he did not belong. Now, the accusation didn't need proof. It didn't even need detail. It only needed fear, or the appearance of fear. And that was enough. He returned to his seat, his body heavier than before. The flight continued, but the atmosphere had changed entirely. Even the air seemed thinner, harder to breathe. Passengers kept their distance, not just physically, but emotionally. Every person near him began to behave as though proximity might be dangerous, as if any interaction might expose them to some invisible danger. The woman across the aisle who had earlier smirked now clutched her handbag tighter against her chest. A man returning from a lavatory stopped abruptly when he saw Malric in the aisle and turned back the other way, pretending to check a seat number. Even the staff had changed tactics. No more casual questions about coffee or blankets. No more small talk. Everything became procedure. Orders were taken silently. Food trays dropped with clinical detachment. And though the others received warm bread, polished cutlery, and wine refills, Malric received his meal sealed, untouched, and left without the courtesy of inquiry. It wasn't a meal. It was a reminder. The cabin became a cold theater, one where the actors had turned their backs to the audience. No one acknowledged what had happened. No one spoke up. No one leaned over and asked if he was okay. They didn't have to be cruel anymore. They simply chose to be absent. The isolation didn't roar. It crept. It soaked into fabric, into the quiet. It wrapped around him like a second skin. He stared at the seat back ahead, his eyes unmoving, his hands folded neatly in his lap. The hum of the engines continued, but it faded behind the louder silence in his head. He thought of all the times he had sat in boardrooms, stood on stages, signed deals in glass towers with views that reached into the clouds. He had eaten beside kings and presidents, built from nothing, endured, and still, here, at 36,000 feet, he had become a warning label, a name on a list, a problem to be contained. He had stopped signaling for service. He had stopped glancing around for even the smallest courtesy. The wall was up, and he knew better than to pound against it. But what those around him did not know, what none of them could possibly suspect, was that the wall had a fault line, and it was about to crack. He sat with perfect posture, his coat still draped across his lap, hands resting calmly on either side. The burn in his knee had dulled into an ache, but he ignored it. Time passed with the hollow rhythm of altitude. Somewhere near the back of the cabin, a child laughed at a movie. Somewhere in the front, the hum of a whispered conversation buzzed behind a wine glass. But Malric's world narrowed until there was only one thing that mattered: the moment. He reached slowly into the interior pocket of his coat and retrieved a sleek black phone, the kind that didn't ring with notifications because it didn't need to. It was a direct line, configured for only one purpose. He unlocked it, pressed one button, and lifted the device to his ear. His voice, when it came, was soft but unmistakably authoritative. "This is Dane," he said, not loud enough to be intrusive, but sharp enough to carry. "I need full documentation on Flight 409, outbound from JFK. Tail code ending in 7A. Initiate an instant review under Security Protocol Theta Red. Mark it urgent. I want transcripts, crew assignments, passenger manifests, every logged complaint filed within the last 90 minutes. Send it to my executive inbox within the hour." A beat passed. "Yes. Use my clearance key. That's correct. I'll sign the release when we land." He ended the call without looking around. But he didn't have to, because in that small sliver of time, the air in the cabin had changed again, not by his words, but by how he said them. The few passengers seated nearby turned slightly, subtly, the way people do when something doesn't add up. They had heard the name. They had heard the tone. And they were no longer certain they understood the story being told. One row behind him, a younger man in his late 20s, holding a worn leather briefcase, began flipping through the in-flight magazine with more curiosity than before. His eyes widened slightly. He reached into his own carry-on and pulled out a business journal. He scanned the cover, then opened to the middle. There, half spread across a double page in high-resolution print, was a profile piece titled, "The Reluctant Titan: How Malric Dane Quietly Took Over One of America's Largest Aviation Conglomerates." The article began with a quote, "Some people seek power with volume. He built it with silence." The man blinked once, then slowly turned to the woman beside him. "That's him," he whispered. "Malric Dane. That's the guy who owns the holding company behind this entire airline." The whisper was not meant to travel, but it did, as whispers always do in small, pressurized spaces filled with guilt. The words slid across rows like a draft under a locked door, slipping into ears and cracking open new questions. The woman in 1A stiffened, her shoulders tensed, her hands suddenly unsure of what to do. The man across the aisle cleared his throat, opened his tablet, then shut it again. 2 rows behind, the same passengers who had laughed earlier now exchanged tight, nervous glances. The name had been dropped, and with it came consequence. The cabin crew, still engaged in routine tasks, had not yet caught on. But that didn't last. One of the junior attendants paused at the curtain, glanced toward Malric's row, then leaned over to whisper to the lead attendant. Her words were brief. Her tone was clipped. The lead's reaction was immediate. Her face paled slightly, her jaw tightened, and without a word, she turned and made her way back toward the galley. A ripple of movement followed. Quiet gestures, small corrections. The cabin, sensing something unspoken, began to recalibrate itself. Malric placed the phone back in his pocket and resumed his prior posture, silent, unmoved, observant. But the eyes that once avoided him were no longer sure of where to look. Some turned away out of shame, others curiosity, a few out of fear. Because in the economy of power, perception is currency, and Malric had just changed the exchange rate. The captain had not yet emerged. The flight continued as scheduled. The stars outside still glinted in the black. But inside, those who had applauded his near removal earlier now sat a little stiffer in their seats, their bravado drained. The mockery had vanished. The certainty had soured. And beneath the surface of the curated elegance of first class, a new story was being written, not with press releases, not with outrage, but with the quiet return of control. Malric had returned to his seat not as a victim, not even as a passenger, but as something far more threatening to those who had written him off, undeniable. His quiet composure after the call, the subtle but seismic shift in the atmosphere, had turned fear into uncertainty. They no longer knew who he was in theory. They now understood what he represented in practice. The name had spread, the whispers had turned into knowledge, and knowledge was power when guilt had no defense. Then it happened, the moment none of them could have predicted, but all of them would remember. The cockpit door unlocked with a soft hiss, and from within stepped the pilot, not a junior officer, not a messenger, but the captain himself. He was tall, silver-haired, with a flight log written in decades. He didn't glance around or hesitate. His steps were deliberate as he moved down the narrow aisle and stopped directly at seat 1C. For the first time in the entire flight, the silence wasn't awkward, it was reverent. Malric looked up, meeting the captain's eyes with the same level calm he had worn since boarding. The captain bowed his head slightly, a gesture not of hierarchy, but of acknowledgement. What passed between them didn't need translation. It was the silent exchange of 2 professionals who understood how systems worked and how they broke. "Mr. Dane," the captain said in a tone that cut through the air like a scalpel, "I offer my personal apologies on behalf of the crew and this airline. We have made mistakes." He turned, gesturing toward the curtain just behind first class. "Would you please accompany me to the executive cabin? There is a private suite prepared, and I believe your comfort now takes precedence." The captain stepped aside, allowing space. Malric rose slowly, not with arrogance, but with poise that demanded no defense. As he stepped into the aisle, no one moved. No one spoke. The same passengers who had mocked him hours earlier now sat frozen, unable to reconcile the man before them with the assumptions they had weaponized. A few shifted in their seats, adjusting ties or brushing imaginary lint from their sleeves, desperate for distraction. One woman who had been particularly vocal earlier now stared at her untouched champagne, her fingers trembling slightly. As Malric passed the galley, the lead flight attendant stood stiffly by the drink cart, her eyes darting between the captain and the man she had dismissed. But her posture gave her away. She knew. The fallout wasn't just inevitable. It had already begun. The captain turned to her, voice measured, but loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You are relieved of duty for the remainder of this flight. Report to ground operations upon landing." Her face drained of color. She opened her mouth to protest, but no sound came. She nodded once, stiffly, then stepped aside. Without ceremony, a junior flight attendant, Grace, the one who had hesitated before escorting Malric earlier, was summoned forward. The captain looked to her and said, "You're in charge of first class now. Take care of our guests properly." Grace nodded, eyes wide but focused. She stepped into position with a professionalism that needed no embellishment. Malric followed the captain through the curtain, into a space most passengers didn't even know existed. A high-security executive suite located just beyond the standard cabin. Designed for elite clients, it featured 2 leather recliners, a private attendant, and a frosted glass divider. The door closed behind them with a soft, final click, sealing off the rest of the aircraft. Outside, the shift continued. Passengers glanced at one another, faces etched with a blend of shame, confusion, and quiet panic. Their previous assumptions had collapsed in the space of a single walk down the aisle. The hierarchy they had trusted was shattered, not by force, but by fact. The man they had dismissed, insulted, humiliated, had been the highest authority on board the entire time. And now, there would be consequences. Grace moved down the aisle, rechecking each passenger's request with a courtesy and calmness that only highlighted the previous neglect. She paused at seat 1A, where the woman who had faked fear now stared into the distance, no longer bold, no longer smug. Grace offered her water. The woman declined without meeting her eyes. Across the aisle, the man who had clapped mockingly adjusted his seat back without speaking. He glanced toward where Malric had been sitting, but the seat was empty now, and somehow the vacancy made his own presence feel smaller. Back in the executive suite, Malric sat quietly, looking out a narrow window at the curve of the earth below. The world outside moved in silence. Inside, power had shifted without noise or violence. It had shifted because the truth, when revealed with clarity, did not need to shout. The seat where Malric had once been insulted, doubted, and disregarded now sat vacant, a silent monument to everyone's failure to see. He did not return to the cabin for landing. He did not need to. His presence had already filled every corner of the flight, his silence heavier than any reprimand. The moment the aircraft taxied to the gate, the weight of consequence began its descent. By the time Malric stepped off the plane, quietly, escorted not by staff, but by a representative from his own firm, the message had already begun to spread beyond the walls of the aircraft. There had been no recording, no dramatic confrontation caught on camera, but the truth doesn't always need to be broadcast to echo. Those who witnessed it had spoken. Those who recognized him had confirmed. And those within the industry who monitored executive travel had already connected the dots. By that evening, the boardroom in the airline's headquarters in Atlanta was fully lit despite the hour. Executives scrambled behind closed doors, communications teams huddled in silence, and legal counsel drafted statements that would never be published. Malric never issued a complaint. He never released a statement. He didn't need to. His silence was the only indictment necessary, because the facts were clean, traceable, and indisputable. Internal logs revealed service discrepancies, crew behavior records showed marked deviation from protocol, and time-stamped entries from the cabin manager's tablet confirmed repeated neglect. The passenger manifest, linked to a security report generated mid-flight, displayed the anonymous complaint-marked potential behavioral threat, tied to a seat assigned to Malric Dane, CEO of Dane Aero Group, majority shareholder of the airline's parent company. The stock opened 14% down the next morning. Analysts called it a reputational collapse. Shareholders called it a failure of corporate culture. News outlets, though initially cautious due to the absence of footage, began piecing together testimony from passengers, one of whom submitted a verified email exchange showing that the man who had been mishandled was, in fact, their silent partner at executive level. The news cycle caught fire, not with scandal but with shame. Headlines didn't scream. They whispered, with precision and purpose. Airline misidentifies owner mid-flight. Humiliation at 30,000 feet. Power in silence. How prejudice cost a company billions. Within 48 hours, the fallout began. The lead flight attendant received her notice of termination, effective immediately, for violation of customer rights, failure to follow DI protocols, and documented instances of discriminatory behavior. The ground staff supervisor at JFK, who had approved the false seat reassignment before boarding, was dismissed under internal review. The in-flight service director resigned before her formal hearing, and 2 middle managers from the public relations department quietly submitted their departures by week's end. The internal audit team was expanded. An emergency board meeting was called. Investors demanded answers. But none of those answers could undo what had happened, not because of one action, but because of every inaction, every shrug, every side glance that fed a culture of judgment disguised as standard. Back in his private office, Maurik didn't watch the news. He had never needed to. He simply scanned the reports as they came through. Performance slides, risk assessments, media coverage summaries. He sat behind his desk not triumphant, but composed, reviewing the chain reaction that had unfolded. The reports didn't matter as much as the message they carried. A message that required no amplification because it had been written into the very systems they had relied on to keep him out. The chairwoman of the airline's board called twice. She left 2 voicemails and 1 formal apology by email. In it, she acknowledged the layers of failure, the erosion of company values, the embarrassment of not recognizing one's own cornerstone. She offered to fly in for a meeting. He did not reply. Not yet. His silence, again, was deliberate. Elsewhere, the corporate world took notice. Articles began to circulate about the danger of unchecked assumptions, the cost of quiet discrimination, the risk of forgetting that the man in the seat you shame might also be the man who signs your check. DEI consultants used the incident as case study material in leadership seminars. Universities taught it in ethics modules. And inside the airline, every employee was required to undergo retraining, not as a gesture, but as a mandate signed from the top. Weeks passed, but the silence left in the aftermath of the incident was louder than any scandal could have been. It echoed not through the headlines, which by now had quieted, nor through the corporate halls where executives scrambled to rebuild credibility, but through the people involved, those who had once believed they were the arbiters of belonging. The flight had landed, but the journey was not over. For some, it had only just begun. The first to come forward was a passenger from 1A, the woman who had so casually weaponized discomfort into accusation. Her statement, published in a brief op-ed, did not seek redemption. It merely confessed. She wrote about how she had mistaken her privilege for protection, how she had justified her fears by cloaking them in policy, and how in the presence of power she did not recognize. She defaulted to exclusion. I believed I was defending space, she wrote, but I was only defending ignorance. Her apology did not go viral. It was not polished, but it was honest. And for the first time, her voice did not sound like control. It sounded like release. Others followed. The man who had clapped when Maurik stood to face removal released a recorded statement through his employer's internal ethics platform. He spoke not with flair, but with a weariness that suggested he had been haunted by his own laughter. I didn't know who he was, he said, pausing. And that's exactly why I should have known better. His employer, a financial institution that quietly backed 2 commercial carriers, adopted a new travel code of conduct following the statement. The policy outlined behavioral expectations for executive travel that emphasized inclusion, mindfulness, and reporting mechanisms for bystander intervention, not because one man asked for it, but because one's silence had demanded it. Back inside the airline, things shifted from damage control to course correction. The new interim head of cabin services, Grace, the once junior attendant who had shown a flicker of decency during the flight, was offered a permanent leadership position. Her first initiative was not punitive. It was restorative. She proposed a new program called Cabin Truths, a live training experience where former passengers, employees, and even dismissed staff would participate in reenactments and reflection sessions to confront the subtle architecture of exclusion that had once passed for routine. The company approved it, and among its first volunteers was the former lead attendant, the same one who had ignored Malrich's requests, who had smiled through dismissal, and who had stood stiffly as the captain relieved her of duty. She had not spoken publicly before, but at the program's pilot session, she did. She stood before a room filled with current crew members, looked at the empty chair representing Malrich's seat, and said, "That day, I believed I was in control, but I was only repeating a script someone else wrote, and now I've learned how to rewrite it." Her voice cracked but held firm. The room did not clap. It listened. Elsewhere in the industry, whispers turned into blueprints. Other airlines began conducting internal reviews, re-evaluating policies not just around service protocols, but around cultural intelligence, unconscious bias, and the psychological impact of selective neglect. Airline unions demanded training reforms. Pilot associations requested inclusion briefings. Cabin crew academies updated their orientation materials to include modules not on emergency evacuation, but on human dignity. What had started as a single moment of degradation had evolved into a system-wide reckoning. And yet, through all of it, Malrich remained quiet. He did not publish a memoir. He did not appear on television. He did not grant interviews or speak at conferences. He declined awards. When asked by a journalist what message he hoped to send, he replied only once, through a written statement issued by his office. Power is not proven through retaliation. It is measured through what you choose to build after you've been torn down. He returned to his work, to his investments, to his quiet architectural visions for a more just business culture. But the effects of his silence lingered long after his footsteps faded. In one final act of clarity, the airline named their annual scholarship fund after him, not because he requested it, but because a boardroom of people who once didn't know his name now couldn't forget it. The scholarship focused on training underrepresented youth in aviation, engineering, and business leadership, and required each applicant to submit an essay on how they would respond to power, whether they had it or not. The first recipient, a girl from Baton Rouge, wrote, "I want to learn to fly not because I love the sky, but because I want to be trusted to carry others through it with respect." Her application was accepted unanimously. At the airport gate where the incident first began, a small plaque was mounted. It didn't bear Malrich's name. It didn't list titles or incidents. It bore only one sentence, etched in quiet steel: "Let no passenger be unseen." And so, the final landing did not come with fanfare or with vengeance. It came with change. Not sudden, not loud, but real. And from it, those who had once looked away learned, at last, how to see. The end. If this story moved you or made you reflect, consider subscribing for more powerful narratives like this. We'd love to know what moment in this journey struck you the most. And where in the world are you watching from? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters here.